Hello, Dr. Avon Hart-Johnson. How are you?
I am doing excellent. How are you,
I
Lena?
am well. Just excited about you being here with us tonight. Can't wait to formally introduce you. Guys, we have a very special guest tonight. So if you are joining us, please just comment to let us know that you are here. So we are live via Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. If we don't see your comments on Instagram, I promise you I will respond to you as soon as the broadcast is over. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Lena Lassiter. I'm a licensed minister, advanced grief recovery method specialist, and I'm a senior leader in corporate America and founder and president of Forever Healed. We are a nonprofit, and we aim to, just assist those who have broken hearts to end their pain and reclaim their lives forever. This is done in several different ways. We offer grief recovery classes licensed by the Grief Recovery Method Institute. We do this one-on-one, virtually or in person. We also do group classes. We also go into corporate America, and then we talk about the hidden costs of grief in the workplace. And more recently, Dr. Avon, something that I'm really, really passionate about is that I lost 2 family members due to homicide. So we have actually joined forces with the Richmond Police Department, their homicide support group, and we offer our services to them. We participate in monthly fellowships with them, and we offer training sessions with them as well. So that is a new founded family for us. So proud to be a part of that. So we have a few people who are telling us hello. Hi, Mary. How are you? She's been waiting for this one. Dr. Avon. Hi, Dawn, all the way from California. How are you? Hi, Angela. Nice to see you guys. Thank you for joining in. So, Mary, I'm glad that you've been waiting for this because this is definitely going to be a good one. I just told Dr. Avon that you guys will probably have a lot of questions for her. So thank you so much for joining in and adding your comments. So, Dr. Hart-Johnson, what I was sharing with you was that when the pandemic hit, we had classes scheduled, we had seminars that we were going to talk about the hidden cost of grief in the workplace, and then boom, here comes the pandemic. So what do, right? Our hearts were still passionate about helping those who were grieving. We just saw a lot of losses happening during that time. So one thing that the pandemic did for us was it helped us to network, collaborate more, because it does take a community. So we had to kind of step outside of ourselves, and we have subject matter experts like yourself who have come on with us and just share their services, their wisdom, best practices to help those who may be dealing with any type of loss during this time. So it's a pleasure to have you here. I'd want to formally introduce her. I could speak until tomorrow introducing her, but I give you guys a little snippet. So Dr. Avon Hart-Johnson is the president and co-founder of DC Project Connect, DCPC. It's a nonprofit. They're located in Washington, D.C., and they provide crisis support, psychoeducational services, and advocacy for families of justice-aligned individuals. Dr. Hart-Johnson oversees the portfolio of DCPC programming and reentry services provided to constituents in Washington, D.C.'s only residential reentry center, Halfway House for Women. Wow. She earned an executive master's in information technology management at George Washington University. She went to Walden University, where she earned her MS in forensic psychology. And she has a PhD in human services, and she obtained that in 2015. And not only that, you're an author, you are a researcher, you're a wife, you're a mentor, and she's a mommy of a fur baby. So thank you so much for being here. It is such an honor. And speaking of research, Dr. Avon Johnson, I was reading that some of your research actually help you to find to start your nonprofit organization. So can you just talk to us before we jump into children and grief and what we might be feeling? Just talk to us a little bit about your nonprofit.
Sure. So you've done an excellent job. Thank you, Lena, so much for introducing me. And let me pause and acknowledge the guests who are on here tonight. I really appreciate you, and I'm ready to have a really robust conversation. So certainly put your thoughts and ideas in the chat. In terms of our nonprofit organization, it is aligned with my doctoral research. The very first study that I undertook had to do with how mass incarceration is largely affecting people of color. And I was interested in the individuals or people who live in the Washington, D.C. area because there is no prison. So I thought to myself, imagine the sense of separation, loss, and grief occurring within the context of having a family member incarcerated and not being able to see them, to visit them. Oftentimes dealing with financial burdens where you may not be able to leave DC and fly to California, where some of our individuals from the DC area are housed. A lot of the individuals are in Texas, states like Ohio and things like that. So imagine how loss and grief shows up in the context of the family system. And so my research helped me to understand what was going on in the family context. And what I found, I based on a theoretical framework that I developed. And that's just a fancy way of saying, here's the pattern of emotions and and the psychological impacts that I'm seeing show up over and over again in all of the interview responses. And so I named that phenomenon symbolic imprisonment, grief, and coping theory,
Wow.
because there was this sense of symbolic imprisonment. And what that meant is a vicarious state of imprisonment, withdrawal. You know, when you're sad and you're grieving and you're feeling a strong sense of loss, we sometimes isolate ourselves for protection, but also, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on in my discussion about this idea of disenfranchised grief.
Wow.
That's the idea of having or experiencing a loss that society says, you'll get over it, or they didn't mean you well anyway, or you should be over it by now. The time period has passed and you need to move on, you know, or that's not significant. What's going on? Or leave him or her alone, right? Leaving someone alone, leave him or her alone. They'll get beyond it. So this is disenfranchised grief, and it's something that showed up over and over again. So when I looked at symbolic imprisonment, grief, which is, I mean, it was so significant that I had to include grief there because I recognized that this is the thing that society grapples with. And that is when we are experiencing a context of loss, usually it doesn't occur in a vacuum. Usually it occurs where there are either multiple losses occurring at one time, or the significant loss that you're experiencing now unearths some of the stuff that we haven't dealt with in the past, including when we were children. So that's why tonight is so very important, because we get a chance to kind of talk about what we as adults, the experienced adults, or those who are still trying to come into our own, because we're all a work in progress, right?
Right.
And it helps us to better shape and kind of mold that conversation and experience with children. So my nonprofit is basically centered around a lot of that work. And then we began to do work with caregivers, with children, with ladies who live at Washington, D.C. is only halfway house. So we do have a transition home or a halfway house. So women who have been in prison, say in Texas, when they come home and get ready to transition home, we work with them in support circles and help them to kind of deal with those kinds of losses.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Amazing.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Pat. We see you. Thank you for joining tonight. Hi, Chastity. I don't want to disregard you as well. I have to put this up, Dr. Avon, because when I went on your website, this is what your nonprofit says. Therefore, we seek to strengthen families by providing social support programs and mentoring for returning citizens, using evidence-based practices and research, advocate for social justice by collaborating with community partners, and to raise awareness about mass incarceration's adverse effects on families and communities. So everybody, here it is, www.dcprojectconnect.com. Here is the information. It'll be a part of this stream, so you can go back and check it out. But that was just very impressive. I was like, wow, when I saw that. Whew. It does take a community. And on top of that, guys, for those of you who have said you were excited, I think I was excited as well all day waiting for tonight at 7 o'clock. But she's also an author. So mystoryandme.com, you have some ebooks out there. So talk a little bit about that, and then we'll dive into our conversation tonight.
So all of our work is basically underpinned by research. And the reason that we do the research is because we want to make sure that we thoroughly understand the needs, and then we match those needs or match the resources to those needs. So you may read our storybooks and realize, oh, this is a lovely little storybook helping children to understand, better understand, a prison or what a jail is, using user-friendly terms or child-friendly, age-appropriate terms. But it also helps them to see that they can emerge from that experience like the superhero in the story. Wow. So, but the thing is that what we do is make sure that we're not just dealing with pseudoscience, that we want to make sure that our work is aligned with evidence-based practices, best practices, good practices, and to make sure that when we're dealing with an individual's emotions, when we're dealing with the sensitivity of caregivers and children struggling with a lot of complex experiences, we want to make sure that we have truly done our research to make sure that the interventions or the support that we offer truly does bring about the possibility for healing.
Oh, man. Good evening, Regina. Hi, Tanya. Thanks for joining. Thank you guys for joining. All right. So we're going to get right in here. So my question to you is, can you talk to us a little bit about what children and their parents might be experiencing, Dr. Avon, during such a difficult time? And, where loss is prevalent in our society, right, given the pandemic. And then, more importantly, could you talk to parents? Like, so what can parents do to help their children and themselves?
Sure. That's a lot. and we're going through a lot. So the first thing I want to do is to acknowledge that I'm going to talk a little bit about grief and loss and pair that together. And then I'm going to, on the other side, talk a little bit about some of the tips and some of the things that we can do to kind of usher in hope, but also create a healing environment ourselves. Yeah. So that's kind of a tall task here. When we think about coupling grief and loss together, and then we talk about the idea of hope and healing, I pair those discussion points together because I think that at the end of this evening, what I'd like to do is have us each walk away with the idea that, I'm experiencing some of this myself. And I believe that I can come up with a plan. I believe that I can come up with a strategy to help me kind of check myself. And also, if I'm working with children or if I'm caring for children, I'm mindful of what's going on so that I can create that healing space and that healing environment. So that's what I'd like to do. I'm going to talk about 3 types of grief. You heard me mention one. It's called disenfranchised grief. I'm going to talk about ambiguous loss, and I'm going to talk about the ambiguity around ambiguous loss. And then I'm going to offer some takeaways and things to observe in children. So let's just talk about where we are.
Okay.
There's a certain amount of there's an uncertainty, and this uncertainty seems to be something that's prevalent in our lives, and it's most certainly in the lives of children. So when you think about uncertainty, there's a certain amount of heaviness that comes with uncertainty, almost like a burden, especially if you've experienced it for a long period of time. And so the mass media calls it COVID or pandemic fatigue. I think that if we really just kind of tap into what might be going on, what I would offer is that it's called ambiguous loss. An ambiguous loss is a loss that occurs in your life where there's a great deal of uncertainty and there's no closure. And it's got some really kind of peculiar elements with ambiguous loss, and it'll probably start to make sense. Ambiguous loss is when significant people or our significant loved ones are physically absent, but very much present into our lives and affairs. Okay, so what does that really look like? Well, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. And people are physically absent because they're not in our bubble. They, our grandparents may not live in the household, so you want to see, your grandparents, or you want to see your friends, or you want to engage with them. So you're physically absent, but psychologically, you still want to see them. You're still having conversations with them. You're still trying to make decisions around the future that seems to be uncertain. And so that ambiguous loss is something that has its own elements of grief because it's the grief associated with things that could have or should have been. Think about that. Think about this. If we take it in the context of our own lives or even in our children's lives, what might children be missing, even though we have substitutes? And so I need to kind of tap into the idea of substitutes and replacements for a minute too. But think about the loss of not being able to graduate the way that you had envisioned in your mind, that you would go across the stage and that you would finally receive that thing of flowers and your friends would be there and you'd have a big graduation party. And now, you're on Zoom and you're having a graduation party. The first day of school that you looked forward to, things that could have, should have been, people that wanted to get married, or they wanted to go away to college and now they're back and forth between college. So ambiguous loss is a pretty powerful concept to understand, and more so than the language associated with it. It's the understanding of the concept and understand that you could actually be grieving something and having a sense of loss for things that didn't occur.
Wow.
And that's pretty powerful to tap into that and to understand that. So we can use our understanding to help children in their journey as they move forward in their own ways, in their own time, and using these available tools that we provide to them to help ease the burden. So the thing that I would say is that when we think about children and what they go through, children kind of deal with losses in a different way. We as adults, we've got this history and a track record. We've overcome a few things. We've gotten through a few difficult struggles, and but we know that we've and we kind of believe that we can kind of get through some stuff because we're here. Children have that brand new slate where they look at us as the models.
Yeah.
They look at us as the way in which they should start to process things. And even if they act as though they're not listening or looking, they're watching. So the thing that's important about children and loss in the whole context of this pandemic and what we're going through is that children at a young age start to figure out how to solve these kinds of problems or dilemmas and how to work through it in their future, right? Because children will, and I cautiously say this, but I have to be very honest and candid, children are going to experience loss in their lives as they move forward. They're going to experience losses such as, the transitions that occur in school. Somebody that was their best friend moves to another town. They're going to go through relationships where boy meets girl or otherwise, and then they go through the painful breakup. What we teach them about loss at a young age helps to provide those models for when they get older. And so it's so critically important because, how many things, have shown up in our lives, and it's like, nobody ever told me this is what to expect, right? Nobody ever told me that that I would encounter this kind of thing. And it's like, well, gee whiz, I wasn't aware of it. So the thing that I would ask each of us this evening, as we kind of think through and go through the various types of loss and what our children might be experiencing, I'd ask you to check in and think about how you've been doing. How are you feeling? How are you getting through this experience? And I ask you that because you have to have a strong sense of who you are and how you're showing up in a child's experience. Not only in a child's experience, but your family and your friends. How are you doing right now? How are you coping? We each have our own bubbles, and we each have, our limited access or whatever, but we're experiencing this thing. So it's very important for us to have a strong sense of self-awareness, because once we start to go inside and ask ourselves how we're feeling, then we can kind of learn to observe and try to figure out what our children are feeling, or the children of whom are under our care. So one thing that Lena mentioned is that we do a lot of work at the halfway house in DC. And so when you think about loss and how it shows up and how, loss has a great deal of parallel. So when I think about the work that we do there, and we're doing a lot of work virtually, but I think about the loss that these ladies at the halfway house have encountered: a loss of reputation, a loss of what should have or could have been. Sometimes they have a loss of relationship with their children. They are dealing with a loss of a job or future opportunities. So those losses show up, and they generally show up, in multiple ways, and it becomes complicated. So we've got disenfranchised grief, because someone says, you made your bed hard, you should lay in it.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore you should not be suffering. You did that to yourself and you did that to your children. So therefore, if you have to struggle to get back in a relationship with your children, you brought it on yourself. Disenfranchised grief. So that's the kind of grief that gets stuffed over and pushed under a rug and not respected. And the sad thing about that is that it doesn't come with any kind of support, ritual, that kind of thing that you get from grief that's acknowledged. And then what I think children might be experiencing is a little bit of anticipatory grief. That's when you start to anticipate grief or anticipate loss, and you're in the middle of a pandemic and things are uncertain. So now you're anticipating, am I going to lose my mom? Am I going to lose my dad or grandma? Am I ever going to be able to go back to school? And so imagine what a child is thinking when they walk past a TV and hear a debate saying, well, no, we're not ready to open the schools yet. And then you hear another debate, yes, we should open the schools. So think about how that plays out in the context of a child's life. So anticipatory loss, and that, you've got this anxiety and fear of something that hasn't taken place. And we've already talked about ambiguous loss. So let's establish what that loss might look like and how it shows up in a child's life. Well, we know that grief is this deep sense of sorrow. Sometimes it's sadness or, described as emotional pain. But the thing that's interesting about children is that we don't always have a sit-down conversation about what children are feeling, right? So we as parents, we've got to figure out a way to kind of learn to speak their language, learn to observe them, learn to speak their language and ask age-appropriate questions so that we can kind of, know how to tap into what children are going through. And then we can come up with, with ideas and the creativity to help create that healing space. So I want to give you an example, and then I want to talk to you. I want to draw from a parallel that something that happened in my own life with my young granddaughter. So my young two granddaughters, one is age 10 and the other one's age 8, and they're cute as buttons. They have really been doing good, with maintaining their grades in school and, staying on Zoom and all of this. I mean, socially distancing, they got through the summer and everything. And then we had the first snowstorm. And they went out to play with their masks on. They were socially distanced. They got out on the sleds and they played. And 2 days later, the 10-year-old got COVID. And she came in with a fever and kind of a froggy, sound of her voice, strep throat. The whole house is wearing, there's only 3 of them in the house. They're wearing masks in the house. And the doctor said, okay, well, we caught it just in time, so you can, maybe stop the spread. And so she gets quarantined in her room. She's 10. So she's quarantined off in her room. She's got a fever and she's got a scratchy voice. And then the other young one is now, wearing a mask in the house. The mom is wearing a mask and they're separated. And so I thought about it and I said, this must be absolutely just the most scary thing. And I started thinking about what might be going on in the context of that household, because I said, first of all, what might she be thinking? Right? So she's got COVID and she's afraid that mom and sister are going to get it. So that's the anticipatory loss. What happens if my mom or sister, something happens to them? There's also a worry about what might be happening with her. You hear loss on the internet, on TV, and everything else. And so how do you respond to that? Well, the first thing not to do, even though there's a quarantine, we still have to find a way to reach in. You've got to provide that support rather than to leave them alone in isolation. She needs that. So I arranged a it's kind of corny name, but it's a paint and tea sip, or a paint and sip with iced, with tea, hot tea. And I went out and I bought, all the materials and everything else for this particular, paint and tea sip. And mom would be in one room. I invited some other young kids, and we all had like a little paint and hot tea sip. And the thing that it did is, number one, everyone asked, how are you feeling? So we acknowledged what was going on rather than to sweep it under the rug. We're actually modeling, how to engage and not stigmatize the event by saying she's in isolation, don't talk about it,
Right.
don't discuss it, right? So that's very important. So we acknowledged it. Number two, we provided support. Rather than to say, stay in bed, be by yourself, not get on Zoom, not to talk to your friends, what are some of the alternatives that we can come up with? So we had like a little, party. She was in her room and we all painted, and she felt supported. And that was the most thing about it. I mean, the most important thing about it, because we actually acknowledged what was going on. Unacknowledged, and this is the takeaway, unacknowledged and unresolved loss just piles up. And so you might say, and other parents may have a different way of handling it, but they may say, oh, let her, stay in the room, stay by herself or whatever, stay off the phone or whatever, and let her just sleep. Well, sometimes just the opposite is needed. And evidently, obviously in this case, we needed to provide a certain, a certain, we'd have to abide by a certain set of rules. So that happened. The thing that I would say that the key takeaway is to acknowledge the issue, observe what was going on, ask the child what they're feeling, to reinforce that it's not their fault. So imagine the thoughts that may have been going through her mind, thinking, I wanted to go out on a play date, and then I ended up getting COVID, and now, I'm afraid, that I'll never get a chance to play with my friends again. You see how that might be interpreted. Yeah. And by the way, the mom might be thinking, that it's her fault for letting the kids go out on a play day. So giving it some sunlight and helping to talk about it, acknowledge the issue, talk it through, offer support, reinforce that it's not their fault, honor their feelings in terms of, I'm kind of scared, acknowledge the feelings, and then provide that support. And if you can, come up with a way of planning an activity or planning something around it. So, parents, the thing that I would say is know what to watch for, what to do, and when to seek help. So, as parents, I think that if we observe our children and we get to know our children, we have a tendency to understand when something is not right. I taught a parenting class. It was called Candid COVID Conversations, actually. And it was a conversation with parents on how to have difficult discussions about candid, I'm sorry, the pandemic during the age of George Floyd and all of this unrest.
Yeah.
One of the parents asked in the chat, he said, his son has started to, he's 13, and he started to retreat in his room and play video games, and that's all he does. And I don't know if he's upset about the pandemic or if this is just a puberty thing. And he said, what do you think? And I said, well, it depends. And so the question had to be put back to him, because your children's normal behavior in the context of your child's, in your family environment. So the question is, has he broken from the norm? But sit down and talk to him, right?
Yeah.
And ask them. I noticed that you were watching the report on the COVID deaths. I felt sad about that. Um, how did it make you feel? You know, that kind of question, to open up the platform for a bit of dialogue and conversation to kind of tap in. I wanted to share something that's probably unorthodox, and I want to leave you with some takeaways, but I want to share something that parents may not think about. And I found myself pondering this, so I'm going to share it because it's really compelling information. Children learn, especially young children, through their senses. They experience the world through their senses. You know, sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. And the thing that's interesting is that when children are experiencing a great deal of uncertainty and loss, think about how the context of their senses might exacerbate it. So, what do I mean by that? How could loss possibly be associated with smell? Think about if your teacher wore a favorite perfume, and then your mom sprinkles some on, and you're like, oh, my teacher used to wear that. And now you start thinking about, and you have this neural association with, you know, I miss school. I miss my teacher. Touch, you know, if they've lost something, you know, that they remember touching or holding or engaging in some kind of activity. The taste of a meal, or remembering you used to go to a favorite restaurant. With me and my granddaughters, we used to go to that frog place where you get the frozen yogurt. And that was, you know, the place where, you know, we experienced so many, you know, happy times. And it's like, now we're not doing it because of social distancing.
Right.
And you know, the thing that that stood out to me the other day, I was working out, and I had a pair of tennis shoes that I used to take to the beach with me all the time. They're really lightweight and they're great to travel with. And I put the tennis shoes on because they were the nearest pair near me. I left the other ones in the other room. And I looked at the toe, or around the toe area, and there was some sand on the tennis shoes because I'd always taken them to the beach with me. And I looked down, you know, I kind of got on this treadmill, and I was like, wow, I'm feeling like really kind of out of sorts right now, a little melancholy. And I realized, and this is the self-check, and this is the self-awareness, that I realized that seeing the sand on my shoes reminded me of not being able to go to the beach.
Wow.
And so I had to sit with that for a moment, and then I kind of flipped the script, and I basically said, wait a minute. Those are fond memories, and we're going to get a chance to, I'm going to bring it up when we have our Friday night Zoom, you know, with the family, and talk about how when things get, you know, better, you know, we'll travel to the beach and we'll have a good time. So I've talked about a lot, but I want to tap in some a couple of takeaways, and then I want to talk a little bit about dealing with technology fatigue, and then maybe open it up for some questions. So some of the takeaways in terms of how do you deal with children, or how do you address children dealing with all of this loss, you know, the loss of school, the loss of friends. You know, you're trying to be a parent, but not hard-nosed on the children. You got to social distance. You know what happens when children are out on their own. You're trying to keep your children safe. Observe the feelings and the behaviors of your children. You know your children better than anyone else.
Yeah.
Honor their feelings. Honor their feelings. If they're sad, if they're withdrawn, talk with them. Learn their language and how to communicate with them.
I love that. I love that. Learn their language. I love
Do
that.
it in a way that's compassionate. Here's something that's really important. try not to offer substitutes or replacement in replace of. And what I mean by that is if they have a significant loss, acknowledge that the loss is significant. Let them determine if there's something else that they want to put in place. Come up with a strategy together, because it may be misconstrued is that you're trying to just, backfeed it with another item. And the pain that's associated with the significant loss is that pain that's associated with that loss.
Yeah, those particular items. Yeah.
And grief is the emotion that's attached to that loss. It's the sadness, and it's it's a natural reaction. Help children to prepare for loss as a part of their development. You can model that behavior. Check in with yourself. Check in with yourself and see what's showing up. I mean, sometimes we've got a pretty big burden to carry being parents and adults. But make sure that you check in, support the children, and come up with ideas in terms of making sure that they're not grieving alone. And this might take a little bit of creativity, but you can pull it off if you give it enough thought. Take an active role in helping children to deal with emotions. For young children, I've worked with young children before, and I've got a couple exercises in my book for young children, those that are not really sure about what they're feeling. And sometimes I do it in groups. We create this thing called an emotion tree. And the tree is just a regular tree that you draw leaves, and you put a bunch of leaves on it, and you start talking about what are the emotions. You can write it, or the child can write it. I feel sad, or I feel, and then you can kind of work through, what are you feeling? I feel happy. I feel, and just kind of explore it through the tree. Another activity that we do is create a box of memories and keepsakes. And sometimes we actually identify what's going in that box. I miss my fill in the blank, and put that in the box. And that gives you something to tap in. Parents sometimes wonder how much emotion to share with children, whether or not you should cry in front of your child. I will leave that up to you to gauge. But hiding emotions teaches your children to hide the emotions. So, manage that to the degree that you feel comfortable. Be honest, honor their emotions. Make sure that you allow them to have the full range of emotions. Sometimes they're going to be angry and frustrated. So let's deal with technology fatigue. Let me give you some quick tips on technology. And all of this going on, by the way, pat yourself on the back and give yourself kudos for getting through where you are now and getting through this. This is some kind of tough stuff. And so it really does require that you do a lot of pondering, Google or go to YouTube, and there's some great websites, and make sure that you have some support resources. There's lots of groups that are out there, including Forever Healed, dealing with technology fatigue. I have to deal with this myself. Currently, right now, in front of me, there are 3 monitors, and not to mention the tablets and everything else, but I've got 3 monitors. So you got to set some boundaries. Have a room or a dedicated space in your house for work, schoolwork, for the online, and have the times, just set some family time for what happens after that transition from being on the computer for school, and then maybe going and doing something else. Allow children to have some rest and some separation there, and maybe come up with some ideas. in terms of how to interact. Maybe it's dinner time where there aren't phones. That's the quiet zone or something like that. Know when you're in over your head. Okay. Know when you're in over your head when it comes to technology. Sometimes it's really frustrating to try to figure out Zoom and try to figure out whatever new thing that you have to link on, or a survey, or whatever the kids are working on. Reach out for support. There are tutors there. There are students who are getting community service credit that are there to help you to figure out, algebra or whatever. Don't go it alone. The other thing is be organized. If you get organized, you can help your kids to get organized. You can set that space and those boundaries so that you don't feel like you're walking over each other. And where's the laptop and where's the power cords and all that? Try to get organized. It'll help make your life a little bit better. Become a cheerleader. And sometimes that's hard to do. I believe that you can do it. Limit the television, the constant streaming of news and internet and everything. You've got to set those boundaries. And here's something that's very important. Two things I'll leave you with. Allow children to make some decisions and have some choices. You figure out what those are, but allow them to have the opportunity to make some decisions and some choices. Because when you're feeling powerless and you're feeling helpless, you feel just that you don't have options and that you're stuck. The minute that you start getting together as mom and daughter, mom and son, you and your classroom, you and your children, and you start creating these ideas about what you can do, what are some of the things that we can do, that's when you start taking your power back and you start moving through this space towards the healing process. And that is towards empowerment, towards taking steps and transition. And then finally, be truthful. No, not stories about a version of the truth. Be honest and truthful, using age-appropriate language. So I've said a lot.
You have. And it's been great.
Thank you.
Let's see. You have a comment? Yeah. He says she's talking about the children in the pandemic. You're welcome, Stephanie. Oh, there you go.
I notice that if your child isn't dealing with a loss that they've had, how do you handle to get them to deal with it? I think that the very first thing to do, by the way, it may be one loss that you can think or identify with, but it might be several layers of loss. And so the first thing is to acknowledge it. So it sounds like it sounds like that that there is a sense of loss. And so that may give you a means of discussion. I noticed that you were sad today, and would you like to talk about it? That might be one way to approach it. Or if you've shared the loss, I'm so happy that we're talking about this. If you've shared the loss or you've lost someone significant and you're feeling that pain, and you have a child in the household who is also dealing with the pain, the reason that I started this conversation off about talking about self-awareness is because if a child is suffering the loss and you're suffering the loss too, and this is occurring in the context of the house, that child might be experiencing the duality of the first loss and the loss of you. And that's the ambiguous loss that I'm talking about. You were physically present, but psychologically you kind of checked out because you're dealing with your own grief. And so now the child may have this feeling of this, I don't want to bother mom, or I don't want to bother my aunt because she's dealing with her own loss and she's sad, or she always cries when, or whatever it is that, fill in the blank. So I think that communication is key. I think that is the true way. Observation, asking questions. And I go back to the item number 2, learn their language.
I love that.
Thank you.
So Chastity, I hope that helped. You said so much. I mean, so many things that's going through my head right now. But I love how you gave the example with your granddaughter to even help parents acknowledge, ask the child how they feel, and just have that open conversation. I also like how you talked about reaching in, like we have to reach in. Because Dr. Avon, one thing that we talk a lot about when we do our classes is how we tend to replace. So I love how you said, don't give the substitute. Because you lose that pet and what happens? We buy another one, right? So no one ever asked the child like how they felt. So then they learn how to replace things. So,
that's right. That's right.
That was powerful.
That is something that is so powerful. Just think about the wisdom of what you just said. If we model that when you lose something, you just go out and buy something else to replace it, or you take an action and you replace it, or you substitute it, think about how that shows up in so many different ways to cope. Well, if you lose something, just go ahead and just eat something that gives you comfort, or drink,
right.
Or find a love relationship to substitute, or find this. And so here's the thing that's interesting, and this is so powerful. If you have learned to seek replacements and substitutes for every loss, you will find yourself in an ongoing quest and search of something that you will never fulfill because it's gone.
There it is. Yeah.
And that happens. So that's like young girls who lose their father at a young age. And then, they realize, wait a minute, I was trying to find my dad in these relationships, or unrequited love. And it's like, so, I mean, it has, it transfers across so many different contexts.
Yeah.
I saw something that I wanted to address in the chat that had to do with, I can't see it right now, but the long-term effects of social distancing on youth. There's this thing in psychology called risk factors and protective factors, right? Risk factors is the assumption or the fear that something will occur and it will have an adverse effect on children or adverse effect on the situation. The counter to that is protective factors. And what it doesn't say is that we're going to get rid of the risk right away, or that we're going to dismiss or replace the risk or whatever. What it does say is, if within the context of this environment, if I put the right kind of support and the right kind of love and the right kind of environment, I can actually offset the possible damage of this risk factor occurring, right? So if I think about this in the context of social distancing and the context of all this loss of interaction and engagement, I am concerned about that risk. But I know that the protective factors that I'm going to give to my granddaughters is that I'm going to give them so much love, and we're going to get so creative. I really was creative Christmas. I was, big garage, and I opened up the doors and I prayed that the sun would shine that day so we wouldn't have to worry about that. And I set up a great big Christmas tree out there and presents on one side and presents on the other. And I stood back 6 to 8 feet taking pictures with my long, photo lens. So we find ways to get creative. That means that we're spending time thinking about it. I see this, it says, I feel the pain of the loss of time with my 2-year-old granddaughter. My husband and I took care of, oh, wow, yeah. So there are ways that we really do have to kind of get creative and try to figure it out, what it is that we're able to do. I really truly miss being able to hang out with my granddaughters. So now we do it in a different way. We actually we're physically distanced, and we just talk about air hugs. We do a lot of Zoom. They actually helped me to figure out how to use Google Duo on my phone. And I'm like, these little people are showing me how to work my phone, and it's like, what in the world, So it's amazing, but children they figure out how to adapt. They are within the context of the right environments. I think that those protective factors of us being there, loving them, telling them that we're trying, and that we're trying our best to support them, and to be honest with them and let them know that I don't have all the answers. Right. That's really, really important. Let's Google, let's, try to do it together now. A 2-year-old, you might have to talk with their parents, but you'd be surprised, the power of Zoom and Facebook and being able to see, and then coming up with some creative strategies. Spring is around the corner. We're going to have warmer weather, so we can start to do some, pretty creative things as we work through this.
Thanks, Dawn, for being honest about how you feel. And then Tanya said that she's still grieving the loss of her father. What steps do I take?
I think that just from that statement, first of all, I honor and thank you for trusting us to have that statement of how you feel. And I respect that must be something very difficult to deal with. I think that in terms of what steps to take, you've taken the first step, and that is that you're in this supportive environment where you're acknowledging what you're feeling, and you're talking about your loss, and you're in the support environment of Forever Healed. And I believe that there are tools. One of the things that I said earlier is that, it's important to have support. And nowadays, the good news about support, and this is, I've been involved with a lot of support circles in the last, I guess, 6 to 9 months. And there's a lot of support where people are coming together on Zoom and on, this is StreamYard, and they're having some pretty candid conversations about what's going on. We've got one on Wednesday night where, we're going to be talking about relationships. And so you've got to be in a trusting environment. There are environments where you can actually just be able to express what you're feeling and to honor what you're feeling. And like I say, I think that the first step of the process is acknowledging and recognizing that the proper response to loss is sadness.
Yeah,
that's the normal response to it. And there's no set time. There's no set time frame. When we lose something significant, I think what we do is we learn to honor the memory and recognize that that it doesn't go away when you love someone significant. You kind of learn to manage and work through it.
Yeah. But Tanya, you did take the first step, sweetheart. Just being honest about how you feel, just acknowledging the fact that you are grieving, and that is the first step. Hi, Wendy Lee. Dr. Avon Hart-Johnson, I cannot thank you enough. You have just given us some great nuggets tonight. I feel full. And I'm definitely passionate about this, about grief and helping people to heal and recover. But I tell you, I've learned a lot tonight by listening to you. And I just thank you for just sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And again, just giving us practical advice as to how we can even have the conversations with our children. Um, any further questions from you guys tonight before we let Dr. Avon give us her final note? You're welcome, Kathy. You're welcome, Tanya. Thank you so much. You're welcome, Pat. You are welcome. Thanks for joining. And thank you guys for showing up and always being supportive. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Thank you. You are such an inspiration. I told you when you're on this call, you're such a, I felt motivated just seeing your bio. And I do follow you on LinkedIn and kind of see what you're up to. And you have always been an inspiration to me. I just thank God for you and everything that you do, your research, your organization. I know you have 2 books coming out next year. So I'm proud of you, with that, all of your work with the women and the children. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for being who you are.
I really want
final thoughts for us tonight.
Yes, I'd like to. First of all, I want to thank you for this platform. It's wonderful, and you're a natural at it. This is wonderful. You've got a wonderful group of guests. They've touched my heart. I appreciate each and every one of you out there. I know that you're doing your best. We are each doing our best. Give yourself a break and give yourself permission to not know how to do all this. It's difficult. Some of the most brilliant minds are still trying to get it right.
Yeah.
So just know that fill your heart with love and with compassion and empathy, and then try your best to move forward in the best way that you know how. And don't stop learning. Don't, stop believing that hope is possible. There's something about the uncertainty that's centered around hope. Sometimes it feels a little bit dark. But see, the power and the beauty of hope is that there is this level of uncertainty and ambiguity, because that tells me that you can now decide which way you're going to move and which way you're going to navigate through it. And that's a powerful thing. Sometimes that ambiguity just opens doors to change minds, to change directions, and to find your way into a new purpose. And that is a beautiful thing that unfolds when you discover who you are on the back. And then one day you'll look and say, wow, I've been through some stuff. I could teach my children how to get through some stuff. And this is where I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what hope looks like.
That's what hope looks like. Yes. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We hope that this video uplifted you tonight, inspired you in some way, motivated you in some way. I want everybody to have peaceful rest tonight. Walk in your healing. You're welcome, Minister Ross. Thank you for joining. Have an awesome night, everyone. Good night, Kathy.
Thank you.